How you feeling?
Yes.
Come on, really, how you feeling?
Yes.
Okay. By the way, Dave told you a little bit of a story. You already know that Dave likes to tell stories in his own voice, right? In his own time. The Dave story, that's okay. There's some truth to a lot of Dave's stories, but I'm going to tell you the real truth behind that story when we first met and I came to Tampa. And I didn't call them fat. I would never do that. I would never insult anybody. Even if I felt that, I wouldn't say it. But here's what happened. You know, we had our power day, and Dave and I took a little walk down the pier in Tampa, Florida. And we're having this little walk down the pier after having lunch. And, you know, I had critiqued his lunch, and I don't think he was too happy about that. And I actually said to Dave, Dave, you're a really good-looking guy. Now, I'm not gay. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but you're a good-looking guy. And he said, well, thanks, Brad. I appreciate that. And I said, you know, Dave, you got big shoulders, really wide shoulders. You used to play football, right? He said, yes, I used to play football. I said, can you imagine what you would look like if you had a small waist? And he said, what do you mean? I said, well, you have wide shoulders, and you kind of go like this. And I'm just saying, if you got rid of that extra fat around your waist, could you imagine how amazing you would look? Because I knew that's where he was going. The majority of the population do things for cosmetic reasons. How many of you do things because you have something called an ego? Put your hands up if you have an ego. We all have egos. We don't like to talk about our egos, but we all have egos. How many of you women spend a lot of money on shoes? Put your hands up. Why do you spend a lot of money on shoes? Because it makes you feel better, right? You love shoes. How many guys spend a lot of money on cologne, on suits? We spend money on cologne and suits and nice haircuts. Why? Because we want to look better. There's nothing wrong with looking a little better. Why do we want to look better? Because it makes us feel better. See, the real truth is the majority of the population forgets what it's like to feel amazing. Because we accept whatever our circumstances are as our reality. We suffer from a condition. It's a condition of acceptance. And we accept this less than optimal way that we feel from day to day is the way it is. We accept this as our new reality because for the most part, most of us don't know any other way to be. This is just our life. And if we don't know what we're supposed to be missing, how are we supposed to make a change in our lives? And see, the majority of the people sail at half-mast. And we've been sailing that way for so long, we don't remember what it was like when we were a lot younger. When we had something we all took for granted. Do any of you know what that something was that we all took for granted? Anybody? Energy. Energy, thank you. We had energy in the form of a substance very few of us ever want to hear about. It's called ATP. I'm not going to get into the science about this. But if you could measure the amount of this stuff each and every one of you produces, it would weigh in at about 150 pounds, perhaps even 200 pounds per person per 24-hour period. Now, ATP is very different from coffee. How many of you, when you were 5 years old, had a coffee problem? Not too many of you. Because if you had coffee when you were 5 and you produced 150 to 200 pounds of that stuff called ATP, you would explode. It wouldn't make any sense. Now, here's the interesting thing that we all have to understand. If you had something you all took for granted, and by the way, you all had something you all took for granted. You had that energy. You were born with that energy. And then that energy was gone. That energy became very fleeting. And one day you woke up and you didn't have it anymore and you didn't like how you felt. Well, let me ask you a question. How many of you in the room today were born with a trust fund? Put your hands up. How many of you never had to work a day in your life? Put your hands up. We all have to work. Could you imagine if you were born with a never-ending trust fund and you could purchase whatever it is you ever wanted to purchase within your life and you never had to worry about it? You never had to think about the amount of money that you were spending? And then one day you woke up and your trust fund had dried up, it was gone, and you were homeless, and you had to get a job. Do you think you would panic? Just a little? Perhaps. Of course you would panic. And so it is with our energy production. We wake up one day, we don't have it anymore. We panic, but you know what's beautiful about that? We get to purchase it. We get to go to the National Bank of Java, and we get to take out loans. We get to take out energy loans. And that energy isn't the same free-flowing energy that flowed through our 60,000 miles of blood vessels, through our 100 trillion cells that made us feel absolutely fantastic. That's not the energy that allowed us to pop out of bed in the morning instead of getting out of bed and hearing a pop. There's a difference. That's the energy that allowed you to get up and run outside and do what? Play. Thank you. Play. Did any of you have to go to school to play? Did you have to learn how to play? Isn't that kind of like an intrinsic program that's passed down from your mother to you? You just know how to play. And the beautiful thing about that is you do it when you're young. You run outside, you do cartwheels. Well, because you can at that time, right? Yeah. And at the same time, what happens when you go to bed at night? You sleep through the night. You can't even do that when you get a little older. How many of you in the room remember what it was like to be young? Put your hands up. How many of you remember what it was like to be a 5-year-old, that kid that sprung out of bed? Put your hands up. Put your hands down. You don't remember what it was like to be a 5-year-old? Your memory is one of the first things to go. And there's a great guy in the room, by the way, Dr. Doug Bench, that can help you with that, by the way. But the point is, when we were young, we had an abundance of that stuff we call ATP. We were able to produce youthful forms of energy without the jitteriness. No crash, no afterburn with that amount of energy. That was clean flowing energy. Do you know what that is? That's metabolism. That's metabolism at its finest. When we think about metabolism in North America, what do we think of? Geez, I have a weight issue. If I eat that food, I might as well apply it directly to my hips. That's what a lot of women would say. Right? There are people that can just look at food and gain a few pounds. How many of you know people like that? Put your hands up. How many of you know people that can eat whatever they want and never lose any weight whatsoever? Or how many of you know people that can eat and eat and eat and never gain an ounce? How many of you know people like that? Do these people have friends? Not too many of them. I want to take you through a little scenario because I want you to understand something. When I talk about obesity, when I talk about the weight loss industry, I don't even like using the words weight loss because I think it's very negative, number one, and I think people need to wake up and finally differentiate where they want weight to come from on whatever program they're presently on. I know when I first put the 3 guys on their program, not their diet, because what is a diet? It's a short-term solution. This is a lifelong problem that we're facing when we talk about the obesity epidemic. And by the way, it affects a lot more people than you realize. So I want to take you through a little scenario, and I want to take you a little bit out of your comfort zone, if I will. And I want you to think of yourselves living in a very different world than the one you presently live in. I want you to imagine that you live in a world right now where there are special health risk taxes that are associated with your favorite fast food and candy. I want you to imagine for a second that on donut boxes and candy bar wrappers, you would see graphic pictures of cholesterol-clogged arteries, insulin syringes, malignant tumors. And these would be accompanied by stern warnings in red that if you eat this product, you may experience obesity, diabetes, cancer, stroke, sleep apnea, sexual dysfunction, pain, maybe even depression. Now I want you to imagine that governments banned the advertisement of these processed, sugary, fried foods and soda pop and restricted their sales to minors in order to protect their health. And I want you to imagine that the consumption of French fries, cupcakes, candy bars, cookies, and all those types of foods was banned in public places. I want to take it one step further, and I want you to imagine for a second that we lived in a world where the next time you went to buy a bag of potato chips, you actually had to show your ID. Does any of this sound familiar? It should. It's how governments deal with smoking and cigarettes. And I will bet that the majority of people that are against smoking will support these initiatives. Am I right or am I right by that? But what would you do if I told you that it was actually more dangerous to carry excess body fat on your frame than anything you would ever associate it with smoking? Would you believe me? Yes. Not a lot of people would. See, according to the latest research, obese people have many, many more chronic health problems than their smoking counterparts. See, the scariest part of all is we have to understand that the majority of the people that fall into that category, and I call this category over-fatness, by the way. I don't call it overweight because, once again, we need to differentiate where weight is coming from. I've spoken to people about throwing away their bathroom scales for over 10 years when I wrote my first best-selling book, Fat Wars. And I said, throw away your bathroom scales because it tells you absolutely nothing about your progress. You know, I remember when I was a kid and my mother was on her 15th diet, and she wasn't a big woman. And I remember my mother would pull out the bathroom scale, and she would stand on the bathroom scale, and she would cover her eyes, and she would start to shake. And I knew it was a pattern. And I understood as a kid that when my mother finally pulled her hands away from her eyes, that if her arms flailed in the air and she went, woohoo, it was going to be a really good day for me. I'd probably get a few treats, maybe I'd get a toy or two. But if she pulled her hands away from her eyes and she started to cry, and I had seen this many times, I knew it was going to be a pretty sad day for me as well. And see, 1/3 of women, 1/4 of men at any one given time could be found either starting or completing the latest diet as we speak. Diets do not work. Diets make us nothing more than smaller fat people because we shrink. We have to understand that the majority of the population experiences a disorder called sarcopenia. How many of you have heard of the condition called sarcopenia? Put your hands up. It means vanishing flesh. Whether you lift weights or whether you do absolutely nothing, you are going to lose a significant portion of your lean body mass by the time of retirement age. If you don't do the right things, you're going to lose a lot more than people who do the right things. The point is, if you lose too much muscle tissue, that becomes the defining factor of how quick and how efficient your metabolism is. So we have to do everything within our power to hold on to muscle. And when I talk about dietary protocols, when I talk about metabolism, I'm not talking about it in the general sense of the word of how many calories we're able to process over a 24-hour period. I'm talking about it on the level of every single one of your 100 trillion plus cells and their ability to churn out youthful levels of that stuff that we call ATP. How many of you woke up this morning and said, geez, I wonder how much ATP I'm going to produce today? Put your hand. And yet you produced it. It just happens. It takes place. You don't have to think about it, and yet you can't tie your shoelaces without producing this stuff. You can't dream. You can't breathe without producing this stuff. And that's what I teach people how to do. I teach people how to re-educate their metabolisms so that they can produce energy. Now here is the kicker. Most people are thinking about weight loss. Most people are thinking about, oh, I have to lose 3 pounds, 4 pounds, 5 pounds. You even hear Dave saying this. I lost 25, 30 pounds. I cringe every time I hear that. Because on my program, people lose fat. Now, I'm not here to sell you my program today. I'm here to explain to you that there's a difference. And I'm here to explain to you it's not about how you look. It may start out about how you look. You may do something because you want to look better, because we all have that thing that we take for granted that we don't like to talk about, and it's called the ego. But the byproduct of using fat for energy is you feel better. And that's what people forget. And every single person that I've helped that has ever given me a testimonial, ever called me up, ever written to me, ever seen me at any type of event that I've spoken at, have actually come up to me, and they don't tell me how good they look. I can see how good they look. They may start out and say, Brad, can you help me because I can't stand the way I look. But afterwards it's, Brad, I can't believe how much energy I have. Brad, I can't believe how fantastic I feel. I haven't felt this way since I was a kid. You have no idea how many times I've heard that. Now listen, we all have our excuses. We all have our reasons for putting things off. A lot of us are procrastinators. Let's face it. I mean, Anne deals with these people all the time, right? People who have wanted to write books, and yet they've put it off, and they've put it off, and now they finally found someone that can help them. Same thing. People want to be speakers, but they don't know how, or they don't have the confidence to become a speaker, and now they come to an event like this, and now they have the ability to hook up with the right people that can help them become speakers. I want you to change your life on every level. I want you to understand that it's not just about financial wealth. There's a disconnect here. There's a problem. You see, you can be as wealthy as possible, but if you're not creating energy, then you're missing the boat. Because I'll tell you, when I saw Dave and AJ and Dustin after not seeing them for about 6 weeks, the difference was the energy. The difference was this whole other persona. Now, Dave's a very energetic guy, but you have to understand, this is a different person now. And it's not that he just looks better and feels better about himself. It's that he's performing better. It's that he is a different person on every single level. I'm going to share a little story with you. Quite a few years ago, a little over 20 years ago, I lost my mother to pancreatic cancer. And it was very quick. My mother died within 3 months of being diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. And that blew me away because my mother and I were best friends. And within a 6-month period, almost to the day that my mother passed away with pancreatic cancer, my father passed away with prostate cancer. So I had a lot of cancer in my family. That's why I got into nutritional research in the first place. And the reason I got into research was I wanted to find out if I was eventually going to experience cancer. Because there's a lot of cancer in my family, not just my direct family, throughout my entire family. And I started looking into genetic susceptibility to disease. And I want to share something with you, because a lot of people say, Brad, fantastic information. I'd love to apply it, but let's face it, I've got diabetes in my family. I have cancer in my family. My parents are obese. Do you know the statistic when you have 2 parents that are obese? You don't understand. I say, yes, I do. But let me share something with you. Your genes, your DNA, your blueprints are nothing more than templates. And you build your unique life experiences upon those templates. And you build your unique life experiences upon those templates by your lifestyle factors, by your dietary factors, not dieting, and by your environment. I'm not talking about where you choose to live. If you live in beautiful Tampa, Florida, it's a beautiful environment. I'm talking about what do you choose to allow into your lives every single second of every day. That's your environment. That's your internal environment. Dr. Bruce Lipton talks about this with the science of epigenetics, something that controls the genes, something that's above, something that's much more powerful than anything we have ever heard of before. And it's our perceptions, or more in line with our misperceptions. Because so many of us have misperceptions of our reality. And it turns out that our mind can control who we become right on the genetic level. Now, I don't care why any of you want to change your lives. I just hope you do want to change your life. And I don't care what your excuse is, because we all have excuses. But I want to share a story with you that changed my life and made me realize that what I do does have a lot of significance. Because I struggled with this for many years. I used to do lectures as a keynote speaker in certain areas of Canada because I was local to those areas. And they would have me come in, and it was a bonus. And so for 4, 5, 6, 7 years, I would be the keynote speaker at the Vancouver Health Show. And I would come in, and one of the things that I would start to notice is the same people, not everyone, but groups of people, I would notice their faces. Oh yeah, that person was there last year. Oh yeah, that person's been there for the last 2 or 3 years in a row. That's amazing. They're obviously getting something. They're obviously enjoying what I'm saying. I'm hoping anyway, unless someone's paying them to be there. And these people would come every single year. And then one thing I would really notice is a lot of the people that would come on a regular basis wouldn't change. And these people would come up to me after and pull me to the side and say, Brad, I'm on, these medications. Can you help me? Or, Brad, I gained, 15 pounds of fat. I feel horrible. Come on, can you help me? Or I have diabetes in my family, and my doctor's just about to put me on medication. Can you help me? And I would put together little protocols for them. I would send them research. And then I'd see them the next year, and they'd be fatter. And I'd see them the next year, and they'd be on another or 2 medications. And this kept happening. And I started getting down on myself, and I started thinking, why aren't these people taking this information and applying it? What is it that I'm doing? What am I doing wrong that these people aren't transforming their lives? I'm giving them all the information. Why am I not motivating them enough? They're telling me I'm motivating them. And then I went to the health show 2 years ago. And there was about 500 people in the audience. And after my presentation, I came out. I had a new book at the time called Awaken Your Metabolism. And I was doing a book signing. There was about 150 people lined up to get their book signed, and I was sitting at this chair. And the reason I remember this is there was a gentleman standing over to the side, and he had my very first book in his hand, Fat Wars. And I remember this so vividly because Fat Wars was all tattered. You could see the little yellow highlights throughout the book, and you could see the Post-it notes, and this was a well-used book, and I was afraid. I was thinking as I was signing these books, oh boy, this guy's going to come up and he's going to test me on something I wrote 10 years ago. He probably knows more about the book than I do by this point. So here I was, and about an hour goes by, and the line dwindles down. This guy doesn't get in line. I'm wondering what's going on. And finally, the last person, I signed their book, and this gentleman comes in line. He says, Mr. King, I'd like to shake your hand. And I said, so what do I owe this pleasure to? He said, Brad, I've been to 5 of your lectures. He goes, man, you motivated me every single time. I said, well, that's fantastic. I'm thinking in my mind, finally, I meet someone face to face. Instead of getting an email, instead of getting a written testimonial, this is someone that's telling me I've changed their lives. And he says to me, wow, I'll tell you something. He said, I came to you 5 years in a row and I never did anything. And I said, what? He said, yeah, I've lost 50 pounds. And I thought, well, that's fantastic. He said, but it wasn't really you. I said, what? He said, yeah, let me tell you a little story, Brad. He said, you see, every year I would come and see you because I was getting fatter and I felt absolutely horrible. And, I was pre-diabetic. And I thought, Brad King's coming, and this guy motivates me and he gives me the right information. So I'm going to come and get inspired and apply his information this year. And I'd come and I'd see you. I'd get inspired. I'd write it down. I'd say, Monday morning, that's it, man. I'm applying this information. And Monday would come and go. And then a week would come and go, and a month, and so on and so forth. And then I'd see the ad. You were coming back. Fantastic. Another year had passed. I get to see Brad King again. This is amazing. And this went on for 5 years. He never did anything. And then I said, so what changed? What motivated you to change if it wasn't me and wasn't my information? He said, well, I have a little boy, 2-year-old boy. And he said, and this kid is my entire life. And he said, and even when I had this child for 2 years, I never did anything. I still came to your seminars. I wanted to change because I just didn't have the energy I wanted to have to be able to experience this life with my child. And he said, so last summer, I was in the park with my friend who's also my next door neighbor who has a little girl. And what happened was we would go to the park and we would let our kids play in the sandbox and we would just catch up and have our coffee and talk and the kids would play and it was just a great time for 2 dads. And he said, and then all of a sudden, one day, we were standing there, and we heard this scream. He said, so we looked up, and our kids were gone. And he said, I looked across the street, which was many hundreds of yards away, and I saw my little boy in the middle of the street. And he said, and I saw this lady in a second-store window of her house screaming. And there was a truck that was coming with a guy on a cell phone. He wasn't paying any attention. He was coming right for this guy's kid. So he said instinct took over, and he just ran. And he ran as fast as he could, and he ran, and he ran, and he ran, and he hit the ground. And he cramped up. He couldn't move. And he said, so, Brad, there I was. I was on the ground. I was on my knees. I couldn't move. I had Charlie horses. And he said, next thing I knew, I saw this guy just run past me. It was my next-door neighbor. He scooped my kid up, ran across the street, and this truck went by. It probably would have hit my kid. And he said, and there I was in the middle of this park, and I started to cry uncontrollably. And I thought, how dare I? Never mind that I do this to myself, because people do that to themselves all the time. But I couldn't even save someone I loved as much as my 2-year-old child. And he said, that, Brad, was my motivational factor. And I never looked back. I didn't start on Monday. I started that day. And I think if anybody can find whatever their motivational factor is, find it, apply it, begin your life. You all have an incredible life worth living. You just have to start living it. And you have to understand one thing. Before you can do something, you have to be something. You have to believe in the core of your being that it is possible, likely, and it is already happening inside of you. I want to thank you so much, and I want to thank you guys for giving me this opportunity. My publicist is at the back of the room. If you want to find out the products these guys took and how they did it, she would be more than happy to share that with you.